Welcome to the Waves Business Coaching Podcast, where we help business owners and leaders get more freedom by equipping them with tools and resources they need to succeed. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes. This week on the podcast, I interview and have just an amazing conversation with Josh Swing of WildSpark. And Josh shares a great analogy with sports, which I love, but titled "Why Aren't You Winning?" He breaks down 5 opponents you are facing in everyday life that will inevitably bleed into your business and how we can beat them. So he goes through a scouting report of each opponent and then how we can actually beat each opponent. It's an amazing conversation. I took a page of notes as we were talking, and I know you're going to get a lot of value of it as well. So let's dive into my conversation with Josh about why aren't you winning? Josh, thank you so much for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Man, I'd love for you to share a little bit about you, who you are, your story, and what you do.
Yeah, Jacob, it was only right. I mean, we got connected recently and just hit it off. And I actually invited you on my podcast first. You added a ton of value on my podcast. And so glad to return the favor, come on your show, get to engage with your audience a little bit. Thanks a ton for inviting me on.
Absolutely.
My story, I'll give you the brief version of my story. I'll keep it pretty concise. I know that your background, Jacob, is in Chick-fil-A world. It's been a big part of your story. And so I imagine that a lot of your audience is probably rooted in Chick-fil-A. If you are, you may have heard of WildSpark before, which is where I work, is at WildSpark. And I've had the pleasure and the opportunity of serving alongside Chick-fil-A teams for the past 7 years. I've been at WildSpark now, where we help set up teams with a clear system of ongoing leadership development, where they would get fed leadership content and then they would get discussion guides to be able to have conversations with each other. So I've been helping Chick-fil-A teams do that for a handful of years. And I like to say, Chick-fil-A made me who I am. I would not be on this podcast right now if it wasn't for, and I'm sure you can attest to this too, if it wasn't for the intentional investment that so many operators and people at the support center made in me so that I could grow as a leader and then turn around and add value to other people. So that's professionally. Here at WildSpark internally, I get to be a team captain for us. So that it looks like internal team development, leadership development. I get to play a role on our content team with thinking about creating content that really resonates with people. And then lastly, I get to function in a sales capacity where I'm getting to consult with organizations and talk about the best structure for leadership development for their teams. And that all 3 of those things just give me a ton of life. I'll rewind for a second and just give you the backstory now that you know about what my connection looks like with Chick-fil-A and what I get to do professionally. But I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but spent most of my life in Birmingham, Alabama, which is where I'm located right now. I love Birmingham. Most people haven't been here. Come visit. Hit me up when you do, and I'll give you all the best spots here around Birmingham. Sports was a big part of my story. So I grew up playing sports, and I ended up playing through college. Graduated from a school called Bethel University that's up in Tennessee, a smaller NAIA school. We'll talk about some of that here in a second. You'll hear some of the sports stuff come out and some of what we talk about today. But then, and personally, I've been married for a little over 10 years. So we're past a decade now.
Congrats. That's huge.
Means we have it all figured out now. We're good to go for the rest of life. That's not true.
Marriage expert.
It's not true at all. Still very much figuring it out and how I can be the best husband and spouse to my wife, Erin. But we've got 3 kiddos, all under the age of 6. So we've got a 5, a 4, and a 1-year-old currently, which keeps life really interesting. You'll probably hear some stories about them come up and what I share about today.
That's right.
But that's hopefully a little bit about me. I still love to play basketball as much as I can. You'll catch me nerding out on some leadership content or playing some pickup basketball or playing floor is lava with the kids.
More athleticism in that than basketball, probably.
That's true. That's true. High likelihood of injury. Floor is lava. That's right. Look out.
Okay, I'm going to ask a very basic question with the basketball reference. Josh, we never met in person. How tall are you? Basketball player.
I'm 6'4". So.
Okay. I was like, that makes sense. I was like, my dad was 6'4". I'm 6'3". I'm like, seems like a basketball thing. Birmingham sports fan. Are you crimson and white, or are you navy and orange?
Yeah, we roll with the tide on
Okay,
Saturdays. My wife graduated from Alabama.
there
I
you
spent
go.
two years in Tuscaloosa, actually, in college,
Okay,
playing at a junior college down there called Shelton State. And so yeah, we got ties to Tuscaloosa. At the time that we're recording this, we're coming off of an awful defeat to Vandy.
yeah,
Gave them their first top five win, I think, ever in program history.
ever.
They were like
That's right.
60 against top five teams, and then leave it up to Alabama to be generous and give them an opportunity to get their first in.
Well, I appreciate you being here despite the loss. I know that's that's tough. I'm a Georgia fan, so I can't really, reveled in the Vandy win, but also was like, man, but we lost to them. That's not fun.
Yeah,
Is Vandy the best team in the SEC? Maybe that's a separate podcast episode that we'll have to discuss another time.
I'll have to
Uh,
unpack that one.
well, Josh, you mentioned sports. With your role doing leadership development, I believe sports are one of life's best teachers. And when you can look at life through this lens of a competitive game, like why do you think so many people, especially business leaders, might be listening to this episode, find themselves stuck or falling short of success?
Yeah, I think life is very much like something that we are all trying to win. Like we want to feel like we're winning at life. And it's funny, we've been talking about college football. So I'll bring it back in here. But as you think about like some of the early season games, right now we're in like full blown SEC mode.
It's October. That's right.
It's competitive, right? But some of the first games, you're playing some like gimme schools, in those first
Yeah,
couple of weeks, where essentially the bigger universities like Georgia or Alabama are paying large sums of money to these smaller schools to be a confidence booster for their season. They
that's
know
right.
that they're going to win like 70-7 or something
Yeah.
ridiculous like that. And I think so much of life can feel like we're one of those smaller schools going up against this big game of life.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's like, man, do we even have a shot? My wife looked over at me as Alabama was playing Western Kentucky, which is one of their schools earlier in the season. And she was like, do you think the Western Kentucky players actually like think that they have a chance at winning? And I think that they do, right? Every now and then you see the very rare upset.
I mean, this year, Northern Illinois, Notre Dame, that was a paycheck game.
I know. And it happened. And
That's
so I
right.
do think like people come into it believing that they could win, but more times than not, you start it's in the first quarter and you're already down 35-0 in the first quarter, and all,
Right.
signs of winning seem lost. Like all hope is lost.
Yeah.
And so much of life can feel like that. I think one of the primary reasons is there's a lack of preparation. And
Okay.
so we generally move through life without a ton of clarity regarding what we're up against. And I remember when I was playing basketball in college, I was a big defense guy. I was a
Okay.
defensive specialist. So one of my
Yeah.
favorite times of the week was when we got a scouting report. And so like 3-4 days before the game, when we would start shifting focus to the next team, our coaches would give us this printout, the scouting report. And on it, it had a breakdown of every single player, all their primary players. And it would list out like what are their tendencies, what's their dominant hand, what's
Right.
their primary offensive move, what's their secondary offensive move. And you'd be able to take that information and you'd be able to step into the game in a way that you felt very confident about your ability to compete against that person. But so much of life doesn't work like that. Like we're just
Yeah.
moving through life and we're experiencing all these challenges without the proper amount of preparation.
Yeah.
And so what I have become obsessed with lately is trying to identify and clarify what are those opponents and how do we prepare for them beforehand so that we step into those challenges with a high likelihood of success, able to overcome them and win at life. I think so much of when I say winning at life, people think about that thing that they're going after that's somewhere in the future. Like they've got out their binoculars or they've got out their telescope and they're looking and they're saying, "Oh man, when I get that thing, that's when I'll feel like I'm winning in life." But you and I both know, Jacob, and anybody else that's listening that's chased after those things knows that it's very fleeting, that very quickly you're turning your attention towards the next thing. You get your telescope back out. And so a lot of what I talk about today is going to be how do we win? But winning isn't out there somewhere. Winning is right here. Like winning starts right where you're at. It starts with your heart and with the things that are closest to you. So we're going to put away our telescope, our binoculars, and we're going to pull out a magnifying glass today. We're going to dig into some of these challenges that we're facing right now in this specific moment.
I love that. So we need to help filter the unknown here. So we need to define a good win. But if we're going to win, we got to know who we're playing. Like you're saying, the scouting report of getting like, what are we up against? Which I love because I mean, again, going back to sport, I make a lot of sports references, which I try to temper down here on this podcast. But man, we talk about pre-show. I think that sports are one of life's best teachers, and that there's a reason these analogies work. So like, our episode is titled "Why Aren't You Winning?" and it's going to be structured like a scouting report for life. And we're going to explore the 5 toughest opponents using a basketball reference here. So the first opponent, Josh, that you mentioned to me was "We can do it all." How is this mindset for leaders set up for failure? And why is delegation or focus like a critical part of defeating this opponent?
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit,
Yeah,
and I think how we've gotten this wrong historically. And I want everybody to imagine like you're Michael Jordan right now. You're stepping into the final game of Space Jam, and like these are like
love
Monstar
it.
level opponents. So some pretty big dudes that we're going up against right now. So the first one is it's this we can do it all.
Yeah,
I would call it a mirage. Like it's this thing that we constantly chase but never actually grasp. It just leaves us more thirsty than we were initially. To help illustrate it, Jacob, everybody's probably familiar at this point now with the big rocks illustration where you got this empty jar and beside it you've got all these different sized rocks. You got the really big ones, you got the medium ones, and then you got the little pebbles that go into the jar. And the whoever's doing the illustration typically throws in the little pebbles and the medium sized rocks. And then by the time you go to put in the big rocks, there's no more room left in the jar and your big rocks are left out. The big rocks are made to represent your top priorities, the things that are
hmm,
most important in your life. And then the person takes it all out, they restructure it, they put in the big rocks first and the medium and then the small rocks. And magically everything fits into the jar where it did not before.
hmm,
And I think that there is value in that. We do need to be clarifying what our priorities are and focusing on them first before we do all of the smaller tasks that follow. But I think the lie that would cause us to believe is that there is this ideal world scenario in which all of the rocks are going to fit into our jar. And
yeah,
we can chase after that with a tremendous amount of thirst, knowing that, you know, trying to think that, man, there's going to be a day where I check out of work and I've got everything on the to-do list done, right? Or there's going to be a day where I leave the house to step into work and there's not going to feel like there's any more chaos in the house. All the chores are
yeah,
going to be done and everybody's going to be behaved. And those scenarios just don't exist. There's always going to be rocks left on the table. And so we have to be really good at figuring out what are the rocks that we need to be leaving out and what
yeah.
are the rocks that we need to be focused on. Another way to illustrate this, Jacob, you just got back from Disney World, right?
Yes,
With
recently,
your
yes.
Okay. So you went to Disney World for the first time, right? With your daughter?
So we've been a few times with my
Okay.
daughter, but a lot of fun.
Okay. So you've been multiple times. I
Yeah.
just we went our first time to Disney World with the
Okay.
kids last year. But
Amazing.
if you went into Magic Kingdom, let's just pick one of the parks. If you went into Magic Kingdom with this mentality that like we're just going to go and hop in, we're going to ride it all. Would
Good
that
luck.
actually happen? Would you be able to ride every ride?
No,
No chance,
no
right?
chance. Yeah.
You got to start out, you know this because you do it, I'm sure. You got to start with prioritizing like what are the top rides that we want to go and ride? How do I get my like fast pass, whatever it's
Yeah.
called now, lightning lane set up so that I can make sure that I ride the most
That's
important
right.
rides and then we can potentially fit in some of the gaps and the other things. And maybe you're also having to make decisions on, hey, maybe we don't ride Tron this time, right? Because we've
Yeah.
got our 2-year-old girl with us and
Right.
we want to do a different ride instead.
Right.
Like you're having to leave some of the big rocks out on the table because there's other big rocks that you want to focus on during this season of life that you're in. That make it look very different if it's just you and your wife going and you want to go ride Tron and y'all are
That's
thrill
right.
seekers, right? So it all depends on the situation, the season of life that
Yeah.
you're in. And so I think my solution to this is like, we have to begin with the end in mind. So to start big picture, then to be able to work our way back from that to dictate what do our day-to-day actions need to look like and what should we be focused on right now. The exercise that I like to do with this, Jacob, is this 90th birthday exercise. So for the audience, imagine that you're at your 90th birthday and all of the most important people in your life are coming together to celebrate a life well lived. And you've had your cake and everybody's saying happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And then now people start giving you toasts. And these are your most important people giving you toast about the impact that you had on them over the course of your life. As you imagine that scenario, what do you want people to say about you?
Mm.
What are some of those things you want to say about you? So I'll put this on you, Jacob. I'll put you on the spot really quick.
Yeah.
So as you think about your daughter, she's 2 now. So, a long time from now when you're 90 years old and your daughter is all grown up and she's got kids of her own probably, and maybe their kids have kids depending on how life plays out. But what would be some of the things that you would hope that your daughter would say about the impact and the influence that her dad had on her over the course of her life?
I'm prepared for this because I've done an exercise like this.
Nice.
So the 2 words I've used that I'd love for her to describe me as was loving and present. Present being a big one. I just want to be a super present dad.
So that tells you a lot, right? The way that you
Yeah.
answer that question, and somebody else's answer may be slightly different with what their priorities are, but you knowing that, man, presence is something that's really important tells you a lot about how you want to structure your days and how much you want to be at home with her
That's
during
right.
these younger years so that she would, years and years and years from now say that, man, it just felt like my dad was always there. Like
Right.
he was always there supporting me. So I think that's the solution. We got to start with the end in mind and then work our way back and think about, okay, how can we create some structure around our days now so that those things are the focus?
I love it. We can do it all mindset by beginning with the end in mind. I love that. So the next one is pace. Tell me about this opponent and how we can beat pace.
Yeah, we move really fast. And you know this, Jacob. You're really driven. You're growing a business right now with Waves.
Yeah.
I think most of the listeners of the podcast are probably very similar. I don't think you're spending your free time listening to content like this that's going to help you grow if you're not a somewhat driven leader.
Right.
And we can just tend to move really, 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 really fast.
That's right.
The Olympics just happened this past summer. And I even think about like some of the races, love track and field, watching some of the races in the Olympics. And like Noah Lyles is one of the, love him or hate him. I know that there's some differing opinions about Noah, but he won the 100-meter dash.
That's right. Oh yeah.
And he's really fast. There's no arguing against that. He is
Very
a fast
fast.
dude. But so much of life is an endurance race.
Yeah.
I love even some of the illustrations in the Bible, right, that talk about, living your life as if you were running a race. But I think it's very much an endurance race. And we get into a lot of trouble when we try to run an endurance race at that 100-meter pace. So when we're trying to sprint like Noah Lyles for a marathon, we're going to burn out. Like we're not going to last very long.
Nope.
And so I think monitoring our pace is critically important. Like we were designed for rest. I love John Mark Comer and, all of his stuff on the ruthless elimination of hurry. But I mean, something that proves this out really well is Chick-fil-A. I mean, you look at the Chick-fil-A model and how they have protected those Sundays when everybody else has let them go. Like, it used to be the way of life. It's like everything shuts down on Sundays. We continued as a culture and as a society to move faster and faster and faster and let go of those Sundays. Chick-fil-A has remained faithful to protecting those Sundays. And because of that, I believe they are wildly more successful than anybody else in the space. And you look at average volume per Chick-fil-A. Do you know what it's up to now by any chance, Jacob?
It is a little over $9 million.
Okay. A little over 9 million compared to second behind it. Is it McDonald's still the next behind it?
As far as average per unit?
Yeah.
It might be. McDonald's, Starbucks are both right there. Always.
Which is like 2 million, like 2 to 3 million, I think, for one of those.
You know what? Cane's is doing a little bit over 4. That they might be second now per unit. Anyway, we can nerd out about that. But
okay, but you get it, right? Even Cane's at 4, even if they're at 4 million, Chick-fil-A is still doing over double.
Yep.
What they're doing with one less day out of the week,
right?
For the entire year. But I believe and I don't believe it's just being legalistic about taking that day off. I think it's
Right.
about using it appropriately and resting, recharging, evaluating your pace that you can step back in even better than you were before. Another great example of how this plays out long term. There's a religion, a group of people in California called Seventh Day Adventist,
Yeah.
and they operate in a blue zone, which is these pockets around the world where people just live longer, and they live significantly longer than the other people that are directly geographically around them. And so there's all kinds of studies on these different blue zones and what makes people live longer, but the
Yeah.
gap is about 10 years. So these
Yeah.
Seventh Day Adventists in California live about 10 years
That's
longer
insane.
than other Californians. They live to 84, where the average Californian lives until about 74 years old. But what's even crazier is you take the amount of Sundays. Part of their religion is being very, very protective of that, taking that Sabbath and taking it off, using it as rest in the way that the Bible describes it. But if you take 74 years of Sundays, it actually equates to 10 years.
Wow.
So like the fact that they're taking that time off isn't like I'm losing this time. It's being added back to
Added back.
them
Yeah.
because of what it does to us spiritually and physically and emotionally when we're taking that time to rest. So my solution here to pace, Jacob, would be margin. I think the opposite of living at a frantic pace is having margin in your life. The way that I would describe margin is the difference between your load and your limits. The
Mm,
difference between your
that's good.
load and your limits. So my question to the audience right now, I won't put you on the spot here, Jacob,
Yeah.
and make you answer this one, but as the audience is listening and thinking about this for themselves, I would encourage you to think about and reflect on if your limit is 100%, if your breaking point is 100%, trying to sustain that 100% for a period of time, what is your current load? So is your load right now 98%? Are you pushing up to your breaking point right now? Is your limit in an ideal place? It may be. Your limit may be at 75% or 70%, whatever you deem best fit for your capacity. But I think it's very important for us to determine what is our ideal margin that we need to have
Yeah.
in our lives for us to operate at our most successful rate and pace, and then being very intentional about, okay, how do we protect time on our calendars and be steadfast with that so that we can operate out of our fullest.
My wife and I actually read this year Practicing the Way by John Mark
Mm,
Comer, and
gosh,
he
so good.
highlights a lot of the stuff he talks about in The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And Sabbath was something we like started doing this year, and we've seen such a good return on it. And there's a study he references in Practicing the Way of they tracked productivity of people and just wanted to see like, hey, when does productivity start to taper off? Like if we keep working people more and more hours, when do they actually stop being productive? And it was around 74 hours whenever like it was just like boom, you hit the plateau and it dropped. And what that comes down to is if you work 12 hours a day for 6 days, that's 74 hours. And it's like, oh, maybe as human beings, we had a cap on this and that's not just working 12-hour work shifts, but
Yeah,
this is accounting for like, hey, I mean, you and I have young kids. That's work at home
it's
whenever they're
work. It
awake.
is
So
work.
I'm like, so it's like, oh, cool. Like, as someone who's, a believer, and I'm like, it's cool to know that, wow, we're kind of created with this cap on our productivity. And that if we try to push past that, we are going to set ourselves up for failure. So we can beat pace by creating margin, which I love. This third opponent, Josh, the wrong scoreboard. Seems like a tricky opponent. I like winning. My number one on Strength Finder is competition. I love a scoreboard. So talk to me about the wrong scoreboard and how I can avoid it.
Yeah. Man, I'm reminded of a story when I first started out on my professional journey. I was working at a bank, and so when you work at a bank, so I was working in like this sales role at a bank. And so
Okay.
part of my role was just doing like normal teller responsibilities and then like
Yeah.
opening up checking and savings accounts for people. And I'm 22 years old, I think at the time. And this more seasoned gentleman walks into the bank, and he walks up to where I'm working and wants to make a withdrawal or something like that. So he hands me like all of his paperwork, and I pull up his stuff. when you work at a bank, you get to see everything, like everybody's financial stuff that's at the bank. I recognized very quickly that this guy had over $1 million in assets across some of the different accounts in his bank. So for me as a 22-year-old, like this guy might as well have been Jeff Bezos, right? He was like the richest guy in the world.
That's right. That's right.
And, and I'm thinking like, oh man, like I need to ask this guy some questions. I need to figure out like how he did
Yeah.
all this.
How'd you get $1 million? Yeah.
And I think like he probably saw the expression on my face as I was looking at his stuff. And what he said next marked me. Like I'll never forget it. And everybody's heard this message in some variation before, but he said, don't be fooled by all of that. He was like, if I could give every single penny of that away for the relationships in my life and my health, he said, I would do it in an instant. And what that told me is this guy, as successful as he was on the business scoreboard of life, he was failing. He was losing at life with $1 million in assets in his bank account. And he would have told you that exact same thing. He was looking at the wrong scoreboard. So, I think at times, right, sports analogies line up well. I think other times they don't. So I do not think that there's a singular scoreboard in life. I think there's multiple scoreboards. Like we're playing multiple games at one time. So there's 4 scoreboards that I strive to constantly think about and focus on. The first scoreboard, Jacob, is the scoreboard of being. Was it like spiritual being? What does my relationship with God look like? What does my walk with Jesus look like currently? The second one would be balance. What do my most important relationships look like? For me, that's my marriage. That's my kids. That's my, greater family web that I'm a part of. That's close friends. Depending on where you're at in life, those relationships could look different, but it's important to focus on those really important relationships, especially with the epidemic of loneliness that's happening right now.
100%.
The third thing would be body. So my physical well-being, viewing my body as a vessel and as a temple to take care of so that I can perform at my best, to be able to glorify God with this human body that he's given me, and to be a good steward of it. And then lastly would be business. And I mentioned those in a very specific order intentionally, because I think that's where they fall on my priority list, and the priority list that I think plays out the best. I do a whole evaluation with teams on those different scoreboards in their life. I won't go into the inner workings of how you win at each of those scoreboards, but I think we lose when we just get so hyper focused on one of those scoreboards and end up sacrificing the other ones. When we try to win at one at the expense of the other ones, means you lose. Like you multiply anything by 0 and you end up with 0. And it's a multiplication game.
The first time I truly thought about this was, like I said, I'm very competitive and I like being successful. I don't think that's a bad thing, so long as the scoreboards are in the right order, right? And we had my daughter, who's now 2, and I'm like, it's like the second we had her, the amount that I cared about work was just it was like 90% down. It was like, wow, this really puts everything in perspective. And to go back to my presence comment, I was like, it's really important to me. I'm gonna be present and around for her, and I want to be able to pick her up from school and go on every field trip and be the chaperone and coach every sport. I'm like that. It immediately became the most important scoreboard, and so it added some, I guess, perspective in my personal life of, okay, maybe I was, I didn't think that I was, but maybe I was holding this business scoreboard up way too high in my personal life, and it was nice to have that natural reset. For me personally, that's great. So our fourth opponent, comparison. I've heard comparison's a thief of joy.
It is.
I've heard a lot about comparison. So how can we beat comparison here?
Yeah, man. Thanks for sharing that about your situation, Jacob, and your story with your daughter. I do think that there's certain things that really just put life into perspective. And
that's right.
Having a child is definitely one of those things, and love to hear how you're working to be very intentional.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
About the way that she experiences you. Yeah, man, I think comparison is the thief of all joy. You want to know the quickest way to feel like you're losing, try to start comparing your life to other people at different stages in their lives than the one that you're at. I think it's funny. This plays out with kids. It's funny that we're talking about kids, Jacob, because like I'll take my kids over to a friend's house, right? We'll have a play date. And what recently happened is we went over to a friend's house. They had a lot of cool stuff over there. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, loves playing dress up. Loves playing dress up. She's got a bunch of dresses. She's got
Yeah.
Cinderella and Rapunzel and Elsa and all these Disney princess dress ups.
Yeah. Yeah.
But her friend had a Moana dress up outfit, and she
Ooh,
didn't have a Moana dress up outfit.
it's a big
And
one.
all that we've been talking about the last week is the fact that we don't have a Moana outfit.
That's
We've
right.
completely lost sight of the fact that of all the other outfits that we do have, because we're so obsessed with not having the Moana outfit. And so I think comparison leads to envy and jealousy, or maybe over pridefulness, depending on who you're comparing yourself to. But I don't think that you
Definitely.
can hold those things and hold gratitude at the same time. I think envy, jealousy, those things, it requires both hands if you're going to hold on to those things. And you cannot grasp gratitude while grasping those other things. And I think the same thing holds true with gratitude. If you remain grateful and thankful for all the different things that you have, which if you're living in America, you've got things, like you've got things to be grateful for, to hold on to those things, it prevents you from looking at the other side of the fence and saying, man, the grass is really green over there. Instead, just water it where you're at. So I think comparison does two things. I do think it steals our gratitude, it steals our joy. I also think it defines what success is for us. So it takes away our ability to define what success is for ourselves. We begin thinking success is having that thing that I don't have yet. And so my practice to prevent against this comparison is to just be the best version of yourself. And to help inject some gratitude into your life, I've got a couple questions that the audience can answer. I'll ask them
Yeah.
rhetorically here. But one of the questions I love to ask people is, what was my definition of enough 5 years ago? What was my
So
definition of
good.
enough 5 years ago? So as you rewind the tape, if we go back to, it's 2024 right now, so 2019. If you go back to your 2019, where were you in 2019? What was your definition of enough at that point? And then how does it
Huge.
compare to your definition of enough today? It's likely you've achieved a lot of the things that you said would be enough 5 years ago, and you've just moved the goalposts to the next
Yep.
thing without taking the appropriate amount of time to reflect on what it is. So my follow up to that, how to be more grateful for it, is what would me from 5 years ago, if they looked at my life today, be really proud of for with where I'm at today. Take a moment. I would write it down. I would encourage the audience to write that down. And then for the success piece, I would encourage people to answer this question. If you woke up 5 years from now, let's just look, we can play it out even further. If you woke up 10 years from now, 10 years from where you currently are, and you were winning at life, like you were winning on all accounts, you felt this deep sense of contentment and gratitude for where you were at in
Hmm.
life, what were some of the actions that you took that got you there right now? So what is 10 years from you, looking back at you right now, saying, man, I really hope Jacob starts doing this thing. I really hope Josh starts doing this thing so that we can get to where we are 10
Yeah.
years from now. And then thinking about what's at stake if you don't do that is really important too. So if you woke up 10 years from now and everything was broken, your life was in shambles, what went wrong? What caused your life to just go completely off the rails, so that you can know what to avoid at all cost and how to combat against those things? And so those are a couple of the questions. I'll pause there. Hopefully that helps some people have some more gratitude, and then more clearly define, hey, what does success for me look like?
I got to a point in my career, this is probably 2 years ago. I was at working at the support center, and this normal work stuff was frustrating me. And, a lot of changes were happening that several of us on my team were frustrated with. And I had a friend encourage me with the same question of like, I was frustrated with that I wasn't to the next step yet and didn't have my next job. And he was like, man, but if you could go back and show yourself, he said 3 years ago, where you are right now, what would you say? And I'm like, I'd be amazed. Like, I wouldn't even believe where I'm standing right now. Um, and two, as far as the gratitude thing, something, Josh, I do every day is I've started journaling, and I've enjoyed that this year, adding this habit, because the first thing I write in my journal every day is just I identify three things that I'm grateful for that day. Like 3 things I have to look forward to for the coming day. And like today, I'm like, I don't even know what I wrote down. I'm going to open it up and be vulnerable here. Today I wrote down, there were some college football podcasts I'm excited to catch up on today.
Let's go.
Very excited to listen. I opened up a new bag of coffee this morning and did my whole tasting profile with it. That was very exciting. And then we're having a family night tonight. And I'm like, I start my day with this mindset of, man, this isn't going to be the same for everyone. Like, not everyone else can be excited to catch up on some college football podcasts, but man, I was today. I'm like, I have like 3 that I can't wait to listen. I've gotten through 1.5 of them this morning. So it's been a great exercise for me personally to hold this gratitude so that I can let go of the envy and the comparison that you were talking about. I thought that was really cool.
And it's like your day is already a win, right? Like you start off with your day being a win. It's not like your success today isn't, determined by this list of things that you need to get done. Certainly there are times when you need to get stuff done, but
definitely,
you know that like, hey, if I do these three things well, these 3 things that I'm really grateful for, today will be a great day.
That's right.
Awesome.
This last opponent is apathy, which I love talking about. I've spent a chapter of my book talking about fighting apathy, which is great. So, Josh, give me your scouting report. Who is apathy? It can sneak up on the best of us for sure. And how do we fight it?
Yeah, man. And I'll bring it back to family and kids here as we round out with apathy, just as an illustration. I think there's plenty of business references and illustrations you could use here too, but the life is so crazy and busy. And I think about something simple as picking up and holding one of my kids right now. And not that I despise it or that I hate it. That's not the case. But apathy is the lack of emotions or feelings towards something, lack of passion for it. And I think if I'm not very careful, I can take it for granted. And I can just move through the motions of life.
Yeah.
And I think one of the easiest ways to be regretful in your life is to not have an appreciation for the things that you do have. Like, our life is full of those things that don't last forever, right? They're here and then they're gone. And I think you want to find somebody who's really cynical, look at somebody who hasn't held on to those things with the reverence they deserve, and now they're living a life full of regret. I wish I would have done fill in the blank. I wish I would have really appreciated this more. I wish I would have took time to really soak up this thing that just isn't an option anymore. There's a book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. It's a phenomenal book. It's just a different perspective on time management. And he comes at it, I don't believe Oliver is a believer, so he comes at it from a lot of different perspectives and angles.
Yeah.
But I have an excerpt from the book that I'll read for people because I think it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And does a better job than even I can in summing up this specific thing. He says, Oliver Berkman says, our lives, thanks to their finitude, are inevitably full of activities that we're doing for the very last time. Just as there will be a final occasion on which I pick up my son, a thought that appalls me, but one that's hard to deny since I surely won't be doing it when he's 30. There will be a last time that you visit your childhood home or swim in the ocean or make love or have a deep conversation with a certain close friend. Yet usually there will be no way to know in the moment itself that you're doing it for the last time. We should therefore try to treat every such experience with the reverence we'd show it if it were the final instance of it. And indeed, there's a sense in which every moment of life is a last time. It arrives, you'll never get it again. And once it's passed, your remaining supply of those moments will be one smaller than before. To treat all of those moments solely as stepping stones to some future moment is to demonstrate a level of obliviousness to our that would be jaw-dropping if it weren't for the fact that we all do it all the time. And this hit me in the chest when I read this for the first time.
It hit me in the chest just now.
As a driven leader, right, we're constantly focused on the next thing. How do we get to the next milestone? How to create more influence, more impact? And I think if we're not very careful, we'll lose grip of the reverence that we should be holding on to these things in our life with. And so a reflective question that I would ask people, are there potential lasts coming up in your life And what is one thing that you could hold on to with a little bit more reverence right now, that maybe you just don't have the appreciation, or your passion isn't in it like it maybe should be, knowing that it's not going to be around forever. But that would be my encouragement for people.
That's huge, man. And I'm like, even my personal life, like my dad passed away unexpectedly. And like the first thing I thought, I was like, man, he had no idea he was doing blank for the last time. Like there was no sign. He had no idea. And so how often, and that isn't like a, hey, you could die tomorrow to do this. But I think there's a healthy amount of like, hey, the idea of you don't know when the last time you're going to do blank is. I think that's powerful. I just wrote down the book to read too.
That's good.
Extremely powerful. Josh, I've learned a ton. I took a page of notes myself of just like how I can fight these 5 opponents in my life. So dude, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your time. I'd love to know if you'll share, where can people find out more about you, what you do, how to work with you, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Jacob, thanks for having me on again, dude. It's like so much fun getting to chop it up with you and just getting to talk about life and leadership and winning, right? Trying to win in life in a way that makes it really meaningful, in a way that we get to hear, well done, good and faithful servant at the end of our lives. How people can connect with me, I'll send you a link that you can pop in the episode description, just where people can find me in a lot of different ways. If you're trying to do that right now and you don't want to click into the show notes or the episode description, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably where I'm most active. Josh Swing. You search it. There's not a whole lot of swings that are out there.
There you go.
You'll find me very quickly. And feel free to reach out through WildSpark is where I work. So wildspark.com. That's WildSpark with a Q. So WILDSPARQ.com, because we're a tech company. So you got to be a little funky with the name there.
Right.
But those are probably the 2 best ways you can get in touch with me. Find me in the description.
Yes, I'll have the link in the description. Josh, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom. It was a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
For sure, man.